Hi, my name is GSeymour and this is my assignment 1A EDFD 653. I'll be discussing Australian educational issues today within a classroom setting. Three things that I think affect students within the classroom are their cultural diversity and other people's understanding, social class, and their gender. I feel like these issues are very important to consider is because Australia identifies itself as a multicultural country and we have issues with accepting people who have moved here for a better life, some more for whether it be for wealth, for freedom, or for some more security. We need to learn how to embrace all immigrants and migrants for who they are and the reason why they have moved here originally, whether it be to flee a war-torn country. I'm currently working within a school within the northwestern suburbs of Melbourne, and we have currently got a few students who have recently arrived from Syria and are classified on the refugee and humanitarian visas. And we are working with, or we are implementing a program called RESP, which is the Refugee Education Support Program. And we're implementing new procedures and protocols to help these students implement into our college environment and community. The group of 5 women, so myself being one of them, want to help families within the community come together with other families who are understanding what they're going through to assimilate in the school community and to embrace their ideal Australian culture. If you can't tell, I'm very passionate about this topic. So I'm going to start back with how Australia's political response and the perception within the media that Australians portray. So as Australians, we know the Stop the Boat policy, which was in the early 2000s, and it portrayed that we didn't want refugees and we didn't want immigration to occur. So if the government doesn't want it, we shouldn't accept these people. And I feel that this has not only affected me as an upcoming teacher, but me as also a student within the classroom. We perceive students as differently if they aren't white or when they have an accent, and we need to change these perceptions. We need to understand that they're fleeing or they're searching for refuge to be in a safe place and not under threat anymore. Currently, in the last Australian budget, so for the 2018 to 2019 budget, there was an increase of just over 2,000 immigrants, so from 16,250 to 18,750 people. Although it's not a lot, it's a lot more than other countries are. So I'm going to start a little bit further on, talking about how Australians have always had an issue with immigration. So during World War II, the government had a political cap on how many Jewish refugees we would let into Australia. So there was a cap of 15,000 migrants for a 3-year period, give or take 5,000 a year. And these people were fleeing like Germany, Poland, Netherlands, and other countries because it wasn't safe for them anymore and their religion was being impacted. And unfortunately, we're starting to see this fixed mindset again with the Islamic community. So this religion is not just celebrated within countries such as like Iran, Iraq, and Syria, but it's also celebrated in most Asian countries as well that people don't seem to understand. So unfortunately, like I said before, Islam is also has been used and linked to the Islamic State terrorist group known as ISIS and the Taliban, which then people correlate that all people who are Muslim or who celebrate Islam are practicing terrorists. It's really a shame because Australian culture in the 1870s actually needed people who practice the Islamic faith to come to Australia to help with the delivering main resources across the Australian outback, known as the Afghan camel riders. So I found that information out by visiting the Islamic Museum of Australia when I was doing an excursion with the school. I'm working with at the moment. So in Australia, the crisis is that Syria is being portrayed that all Muslims are dangerous. They're walking out with guns and hurting each other, and unfortunately the political figures are supporting this as well. Malala on the left-hand side of the screen at the moment has tried to fight all stereotypes and that all Muslims are different and that they all need to be celebrated differently. And we need to change the perception of stereotypes within the media. The quote that's next to her is, "We are human beings, we make the traditions, so we should have the right to change those traditions." I think that's a very important quote because we don't want to see the same thing happen again that's happened earlier within World War II. So we need to help people escape and flee and provide people who don't know with the right education to understand that everybody's different and everybody needs to be identified as an individual. So going back to an educational context, these are some of the points that I will be covering. I feel that education is power and it has the advantage of provoking change within our society. So although in Australia education is free, it is a bit, the more we know, the better we are for it if we've got the right resources. In the classroom, as a future practicing teacher, we have the ability to set different tones of how individuals believe and perceive one another, and it will lead to more cultural awareness and sensitivity towards different topics. The issues I want to discuss are displayed on the screen, but they're not limited to those topics as well. So the first one I wanted to talk about is languages within the classroom. In most classrooms in the northwestern suburbs of Melbourne, English is one of many languages practiced. So there's Mandarin, Chinese, so Mandarin, Cantonese, Persian, Arabic. There are many languages that are being practiced, but white Australians are very stubborn and they refuse sometimes to learn another language. And this is where sometimes the educational system has doubted them. Because they're not expected to learn a language until they finish their high school certificate, there is a 99% student dropout rate, especially, for example, Indonesian, before completing their school certificate. Knowing that if you do know a second language, you're better off in the long run as well. So the next stage that I'm going to be talking about is differentiated learning for students who require different things within the classroom. So it is important to tailor our teaching styles to different types of learners, whether it be auditory, kinesthetic, and visual. So for students who are multicultural and EL students, it is important for them to have access to translators and visual cues. So when doing practical tasks, making sure that we have the correct translation from English to Arabic, Cantonese, Mandarin, Khmer or Vietnamese. This will reduce barriers within the classroom and it will help them to achieve success in their own way, and hopefully we'll be able to start to manipulate the curriculum for that, even though there's just been another change within the VELS curriculum. It's also good that now that NAPLAN's testing nationwide online testing, this will allow students of different languages to practice using translators online, hopefully, if that's an option. But we also need to remember that we need to be culturally sensitive towards some novels and topics that we talk about, like some of the readings in English talk about Iran and Iraq, or sometimes the language is just too explicit for them as well. We also need to realise that equality doesn't help students who need differentiated learning. We need to help them by having equity within the classroom. Regardless of capabilities, it doesn't matter. We need to stop leading that every student's the same and they all deserve the equal amount of attention, because some students thrive by themselves. Okay, so Next topic, assumptions. So as educators, we sometimes assume people are entering our classrooms at the standard, which is not the case anymore, and we can't just assume that they are. Students change when students change from a language school and they come to a state Catholic or independent school. Their routines change as well. They don't have someone there to help them go through the steps of reading a timetable, when it's appropriate to go to the toilet, what questions are acceptable. And these issues sometimes are confronting, and they cause bullying within the classroom. And this comes back to the stigma of how politicals discriminate towards a minority and not a majority of people. Like when people say, you're in Australia, you need to speak English. It implies that you need to be here and you need to be like us and you need to be like us now, which just isn't the case, because as we know, people develop at their own rates. And just because you live in Australia doesn't mean that you've had access to the appropriate education your whole life, that you don't, sometimes some of the students don't have access to religious prayer rooms and their religious rituals and their cultural days like Eid and Ramadan aren't respected like the way that they would be respected originally. So issues like this do arise, and it's a part that educators need to be educated on how to deal with these students and how to help students. For example, I teach a student who's got PTSD, and sometimes I need a learning support officer to help me cope with him in when topics are too confronting for him. But with the support outside of the classroom by Foundation House, they work with terror survivors or survivors of terror, help with the transitional periods after the funding and everything's gone. Okay, so the next slide I'm talking about is cross-curriculum priorities. So Australia Curriculum has started to encourage this within schools, whether it be with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders or the Asia engagement. But this also depends on where you are and what type of school you go to. So if your school receives a lot of funding, there is more funding for them to achieve these goals. Whereas if teachers are understaffed and they don't have the correct learning and teaching team, this can be suffered. So unfortunately, equality in the classroom still exists today, depending on skin colour, where we go to school, where we live, what jobs we do, and for kids, fashion trends as well. But like Karl Marx said, he said that there are two classes, so the capitalist and the working class, which isn't true anymore. We're more along the line of Max Weber's theory that there are more than two classes. There are nearly 5 or 6, and that power, wealth and prestige together is the ultimate combination to be within upper class economy today. Only less than 10% ever achieve that. And society visualizes that our economic stand and social stand correlate, i.e. the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And this assumption leads to better education. So if you're rich, you live in a nice area, you go to better schools, and that you're better, but in the end, we all end up together, which people need to understand. Next one I wanted to talk about was Australian culture. So the Australian culture is more than just chuck a shrimp on the barbie. Sam Kekovich on the left-hand side says it's un-Australian not to eat lamb on Australia Day, which is not true, especially for people of Indian background. They don't eat lamb because it is a precious animal to them. But although we need to be a little bit more culturally sensitive, especially towards ladies who do practice their faith and they need practice their faith. But unfortunately, Pauline Hanson on the right-hand side, with her the security breach of ban the burqa, just isn't supportive towards people who have moved and don't understand that they don't need to be scared anymore. So the next slide I'm going to talk about, because I don't have enough time, is I wanted to leave on this picture, and it demonstrates the relationship between culture and power. Cultural groups stay together, but we need to break them apart so then everybody can understand each other, and that within the classroom. And as educators, we need to dare to go against the grain of cultural gender and expectations that girls need to do artistic and males need to do sport and be strong and macho. Thanks for listening. Bye.